All right. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for taking the time to learn a bit more about beach safety. My name is Doug Hilderbrand. I work for the National Weather Service at their headquarters in the DC area. And it is a real pleasure to have sort of part two of a AMS Weather Band webinar. And I'm all about building a weather ready nation, and a weather ready nation also includes safety at the beach. And today we continue our conversation with Bruckner Chase, who has the best titles I think I've ever met: an ocean adventure athlete, endurance swimmer, lifeguard, ocean and coastal safety expert, a film producer, and maybe more importantly, or most importantly, an educator of safety. Bruckner, welcome.
Great. Great, Doug, and thanks a lot. It's great to be back. I think that you and I represent such critical sides of the coin of making sure everyone not only gets to go and visit the shore and get outside, but does it safely so that they get to keep coming back again and again. And what a great group of people to talk to. And I'm glad we're getting ready to do part two before we start summer 2022.
Absolutely. And so here we are in March, almost April. The weather is warming up in many parts of the country, which means the water is warming up. And I don't know about you, but I've had a few years of fun way back when with spring break. A lot of students, a lot of college. Yep. And so we're all kind of itching to get to the beach, and whether, families have plans in the summertime, or, these college students trying to blow off some steam at spring break, sort of more down in the southern part of the country and even into the Caribbean and beyond. Let's start with the fundamentals of beach safety, rip currents, the little things that people can do, little preparedness actions that people can do to ensure their time at the beach is absolutely fantastic and actually doesn't end in tragedy.
I mean, that's a great place to start. And really what we've done in working with NOAA and the Weather Service to kind of boil it down to kind of a philosophy, a mindset, and then actions. I've been really fortunate in the last week or so to be able to talk to the weather forecasting offices down in Corpus Christi and down on the Gulf, where they've got spring break either going on now or just a week or two ago, because the waters are getting warm down in Florida and Texas right now. And a lot of people that may head to the beach for spring break or maybe for a week in the summer, often they don't live at the ocean like I do, and they don't have experiences day to day with different weather conditions and how that might impact the beach and the water just near shore, and what they need to do to make sure they have a great time and plan their activities accordingly, and also stay safe. And we talked about kind of when you go down to the beach, knowing that, tides change for most places every 6 hours. So the beach is a real dynamic environment. It's changing often. And just because you were really familiar with the same beach spot you've been to for the last 3 or 4 years doesn't mean it can't be completely different this year. I mean, we do beach replenishments here where they move a lot of sand around. So the place that you've been used to for the last 4 or 5 years could be very, very different this year. Storms, waves, weather can change it from minute to minute, and definitely from year to year. So the 3 core things we always tell people: respect the ocean, respect the fact that it's dynamic, it's powerful, it's strong. And we're saying the ocean because that's what we're talking about, but really the weather, which really drives so many of those ocean conditions. Respect the water, respect the weather that you may find, and stay situationally aware, because things change from minute to minute. I've been sitting the beach and had literally the wind change 180 degrees inside of 5 or 10 minutes. And an ocean that was a green flag, as in go and enjoy yourself day with our flags on the beach stands, becomes a yellow or red in the matter of 10 or 15 minutes. Things can change that quickly. And, the action we tell people, and we'll dive into that a little bit more, but we want to start with, go down there on any shore, starting with a respect for the ocean, kind of that philosophical respect the ocean, respect what you're going to find, and then stay aware, because conditions will change all the time. And that's key to being a weather ready person and a beach ready, beach safe, wave safe individual as well.
No, that's great. And, the way I like to use metaphors and trying to compare going to the beach versus say, just going to your backyard pool. It's much like,
Hmm.
it'd be like taking a hike in your neighborhood versus taking a hike at a national park. You got to be a little bit more prepared going out into the great outdoors where there may not be cell phone service. There's wildlife and there's beauty and the views that you get. But again, there are added hazards. We talk about rip currents a lot, and we'll get back to more in-depth discussion on rip currents. But what are the various hazards, whether they're weather related, whether they're just realities of the ocean? You have spent so much time swimming, interacting, dealing with people who are in distress. What are some
Hmm.
of the basic preparedness tips that we can take, and then those hazards that we're fighting against?
One key thing, and we mentioned it earlier when we said it's starting to warm up. And last year we rewrote and relooked at some of the cold water immersion warning information on the NOAA National Weather Service forecast. And right now, even down at the Gulf of Mexico or even in South Florida, the weather may be warming up, but the water may still be pretty cold. Even right now, it was 65 degrees the other day, but that water is 45 degrees. And cold water immersion, ending up in the water when you don't mean to, or going in and not knowing how cold it can be and knowing its impact on your body, can be really, really dangerous. Normally, when anyone hits water that's even in the 70s and they're coming at a colder water environment than they're used to, there's going to be a minute to 2 minutes of kind of this almost like a panic sort of feel when they first get immersed in the water, and their breathing's going to be kind of elevated. And if you combine that sort of shock to the system with a wave crashing on top of you, or ending up in a rip current, or in turbulent kind of choppy conditions, it can go from unpleasant to very dangerous really quickly. So one key thing is knowing the water temperature and knowing what that might be, even if it's 85 degrees outside or 75 degrees outside. Anytime water's even below 70 degrees, it can be a shock and cause that cold water sort of shock response that everyone experiences. I think that's something a lot of people just don't think about. In California, the water's always going to be relatively cooler than it may be in Texas and the Gulf Coast or on the East Coast here. So cold water is really important. Also, we mentioned rip currents, and there's a lot of good resources to learn how to spot those, but often those are very subtle and they change dramatically. But not just rip currents, but also cross beach currents. And if you're going somewhere where there's inlets or there's water flow from the bay side to the ocean side, you can have really, really strong currents that may also be pulling you out into the ocean, but may not be a rip current like you might see in the videos, but being very cautious of fast moving water that might be near an inlet or along the beach caused by tidal changes. And one of the things that we tell people, because we create a lot of opportunities for adults who are training for open water swims or other sporting events, give them a chance to train in the ocean, the open water. And as race season kind of kicks in for some people that do that, there's this urge, I need to go get time in the open water, and really not understanding how strong even smaller waves can be. And also recognizing that wave forecast might say, oh, it's a chest high or a stomach high or knee high wave. That's one thing when you're standing on the sand. It's another experience entirely when you're out in that water, and now something that was at your waist when you were ankle high is now well over your head. And I think that comes back to the respect and really understanding that, getting hit by even a wave that's waist high or so can really kind of knock someone off their feet. And then if there's other conditions, it can pull you into dangerous conditions. And since we talk about families going on spring break, really recognizing that a wave that might be waist high on a parent is going to be chest or head high on a smaller child. And recognizing that the decision-making process, younger people that may not have the experience as an adult, they may not recognize the danger that they could be in. And that's where that situational awareness really kind of kicks in. the best sources to find out about wave conditions and hidden stuff underwater around jetties and sandbars and gaps in the sand or unsubmerged rocks is the lifeguards. There's not as many lifeguards on duty at this time of year in most places as will be in the summer, but I would never go into the water, even as a lifeguard, without checking with someone who's a local and who knows that shore and knows that water, because there's stuff you can see and there's stuff that you cannot see. And that's really why we talk about respecting it, respecting that there's stuff you don't know.
Yeah, no, that's great advice. And, for the parents out there with, especially the more inexperienced children, they may be great swimmers in the pool, confident, you barely have to check on them. But if they haven't had that experience in the ocean, that's when you have to make sure you have the buddy system, make sure you have eyes from the beach on where they are. You talked about the cross beach current, the longshore current. I just experienced last summer, very strong longshore current where I think they had over 100 missing children reports because the kids would go in the water, they'd be taken down 3 or 4 blocks, and then they'd come back out, and you know how it is in the summertime at the beach, you have no idea where you are.
Exactly.
And then on the cold water front, and this is a good lesson for kayakers, canoers, people who do like water sports beyond just, recreating in the, the surf zone. We have come across too many stories of experienced kayakers, whether it's, wind driven, current driven, wave driven, they'll capsize in that cold water unexpectedly. And then the panic sets in, and that's when a very dangerous situation occurs. So again, and that goes beyond just the ocean, any waterway where it's still very cold, you got to take that into account. And, I'd be remiss to not say this. That's why you got to wear that life jacket. That life jacket is not about your level of swimming ability. It's what if you bump your head? What if you get in that cold water and, your body doesn't react as well as you think it might. So
absolutely.
Lots of safety, but easy tips,
yeah.
right?
Yeah. I think that, we talk about, thinking like a lifeguard. If you look at surfers or lifeguards, you'll see us wearing wetsuits in the summer because often we're dressing for the water conditions that we're going to end up in, because we know that even while the water's pretty refreshing, if you're a beachgoer and you're just cooling off, if I'm in the water doing a rescue, or if I'm in the water for an extended period of time, that cold water is going to sap my ability to respond as effectively and as efficiently if I wasn't protected. And so always kind of knowing, prepare and dress for the water or that immersion. So if you're on a kayak and you go, oh, I never fall in, I'm just going to be fine. You may not be, especially if you're not around it all the time. I mean, I'm in the water year round in all kinds of conditions, and I've fallen off of a surf ski, and I can tell, even though I'm prepared for it and know, I can tell that I respond slower and it takes me longer to get back up on the ski in the winter when it's 32 degrees as opposed to summer when it's 85. And that delay can really mean an uncomfortable experience or a dangerous experience in which you really need to be rescued. And the other thing too is have people know where you're going. At spring break, you kind of want to get away, or you want to go out early in the morning when no one's around and just have the beach to yourself. I love that as well, but I always want to know where I am, know where to get help, and have someone else at least know where I am and where I'm supposed to be, when I'm supposed to be coming back.
No, excellent points. And, switching gears just slightly here, the one way to describe a beach is it's open, right? There's, buildings are, out of the surf zone, sometimes over 100 yards away. People don't like their day at the beach ruined by, what seemingly looks like a distant thunderstorm. Talk to me about the lightning risk, blue strikes seemingly coming out of the blue, and unfortunately some very sad stories, even as recently as last summer.
Yeah, it's great. And I think this is why it's such a perfect marriage of the Weather Ready Nation, safe place campaigns, and applying that to, when you're at the beach and everything, because, we're talking about preparing people for dangerous weather conditions, and some of those dangerous weather conditions become even more dangerous in the open exposed areas like the beach. So, tragically, at the end of last summer, we had a lifeguard that was killed on duty, and other beach patrons and lifeguards were injured when a lightning strike occurred in the afternoon. I believe this was in August. And the lightning strike occurred pretty far ahead of what would have looked like where the storm actually was. And I learned from you and friends at National Weather Service, so that's kind of a blue strike, where it's basically a lightning strike coming out of blue sky. And I think that what it really did with all of us in the ocean lifeguard community is really looking at, when do we signal to have people leave the beach? When do we put up those red flags and clear the water? All we can do is be the example of, this is not safe. It's not safe to be here, and it's time to leave. And I know people go, oh, I can push it a little bit longer, I can wait a little bit longer. People talk about how seldomly lightning strikes somewhere and how rare that is. Yet I've spent enough time on the beach that I've watched lightning strike and ignite a storage shed on the beach. And then last summer, having one of my lifeguard peers loses life because of a lightning strike. It is something that you need to be aware of, and you need to know how and when to seek safety. I think one of the Weather Service kind of phrases is, when the thunder roars, go indoors. And I think that it comes back to really getting away from the beach and getting into a protected area, knowing how to leave the beach quickly, and don't leave it to the last minute, because you will not always be okay. So I'll tell you that we as professionals are going, okay, well, we had this in writing, and we know this was our procedure, but now we lost one of our own. So do we need to be a little bit more adamant about when we clear the beach, and clearer in communicating the dangers? And that's where, fortunately, everyone that's involved and passionate about protecting others around weather conditions and everything play a role. That often we look for other people to kind of validate our decision. So if the lifeguards are saying leaving and everyone else is staying, but you're the family or you're the person that goes, no, I know this is dangerous, and you start to leave, and you also encourage others to, that's kind of where we all start to kind of take care of each other and look after each other, kind of sharing that knowledge and information that might protect all of us. Because we're not going to come through as lifeguards, with, we don't have the ability to clear 100,000 people off the beach. We need to put the warning flags up, and then really rely on the community to kind of step in and go, it's time to get to safety.
Yeah, no, I mean, our when thunder roars, go indoors. It's not, unfortunately, people make their decision based on whether it starts raining or not, right? As soon as it starts raining, they'll take action. Yet the rain is not a threat to your life in this instance, like the lightning is. And that's why we're not, when rain starts, we don't have a jingle about seeking shelter on rain. But when thunder roars, or when you see that lightning strike, that's when you head indoors and stay safe. So always a good reminder.
Yeah, and also
at the beach. Yeah, go ahead.
And especially, and the other thing too is, most of the time, the thunder and lightning storms, it's not going to rob you of an entire week of vacation time. Maybe a couple of 3 hours until it kind of passes through. I mean, our summer storms can kind of pass through pretty quickly. And in a lot of areas, knowing the forecast, and that's the other thing too, is not just seeing what is in front of you, the situational awareness, but also looking at an hourly forecast and look at what the lifeguards are posting and sharing. It might be an opportunity to actually better plan your day. So it's like, yeah, I know there's a chance of thunder and lightning storms coming in this afternoon, so we're going to go down to the beach a little bit earlier today so that we're gone before that happens. A little bit of information can help you make the most of that spring break by planning the favorite things you love to do at the right times.
Yeah, no, we got an interesting comment about a participant in our webinar here who was actually at the beach in the vicinity of the lightning strike at Seaside Park, and there is a good point that Anthony here is making, and that is sometimes there's very little, if any, warning in the sense of there always has to be a first strike, right, of lightning, and not always the train that you can see far away coming at you, but it almost develops over top of you, or it's a storm that you're not getting a lot of lightning, and it's just one of those instances where, again, a blue strike, lightning comes out of the top of the cloud, but it's hitting an area that right above it is blue. Sometimes it's just a really unfortunate situation. So we're not, we don't want to ever be judgmental and say that people should have done something differently, because unless you were there, unless you were in that situation. But certainly if you're seeing the lightning, hearing the thunder, that is when the time to take action. So Anthony, thank you for that comment. I wanted, again, unless you have anything else on that point.
No, I think it's great. I think Anthony's comment too, that also looking at the forecast and looking at what's coming, because there are instances where stuff will pop up out of seemingly nowhere and stuff, but often there is, it would be great if there was a better warning for some of this. And the main thing is it comes back to being aware, and kind of we're constantly playing a kind of a best guess of our experience of how quickly could this be on us, and what normally happens in this area at this time of year, and trying to keep everyone protected based on the best information that we've got, and then an awareness of how it can evolve and be a very dynamic situation.
Yeah, thank you for that. So we're going to change gears a little bit again. Let's get back into the ocean. But let's think about lessons from afar. Let's go international, because the United States doesn't have a monopoly on ocean dangers and rip currents and all of that. And you're a world traveler. You've been engaging different countries. Kind of wrap all of that, your experience up, and tell us about sort of international beach safety.
Well, I think one of the things, I've been really lucky. I've gotten to spend a lot of time with lifeguard agencies in the Pacific and Australia, and even over in Europe. And I think one of the things I want to kind of stress is there was a study that Life Saving Society Canada put out looking in Ontario, and really looking at the impact of, we talk a lot about drowning deaths, but the other thing that impacts our communities and individuals and the first responders is instances where it's not a death, but actually someone's hospitalized. And in one study, the number of people that were hospitalized because of an adverse or a dangerous situation in the water was 4 times the number of deaths, which means there's an even larger number of people that can be really impacted traumatically by something. It's not just deaths, but traumatic drowning experiences, and really recognizing that is something to watch for. And I think that pulling from other places where you may end up not having as many lifeguards as we have, say along the Jersey Shore where I am, where we've got beach patrols of 150, 175 people guarding 4 or 5 miles. You go to other areas that are pristine beaches that might be very dangerous, and there are not lifeguards immediately available that are seconds away. And I think that if you look at what many agencies like the U.S. Lifeguard Association is doing, Surf Life Saving Australia, what we need to do is educate and teach people, but then also look at a way to kind of, are we reaching the people we need to reach, and are we kind of creating these protective factors within the community of people visiting that beach as tourists, within the community of people that live there and call that area home, by creating a more informed group of people before they arrive on the sand. And that's what so many of the campaigns are focused on in Surf Life Saving Australia, because they know that the beach is the destination for a huge percentage of the population. And there are only so many lifeguards and so many places that they can have a strong presence at all times. And so I think really focusing on how do we build protective factors within the community? How do we tell people the basic actions they can take if they're in trouble, say how to survive a rip current if you're caught in one, and more importantly, kind of how do you protect others if you see something else happen that's dangerous or someone else is in trouble. And I think that, one of the things too, coming out of COVID for the last couple of years, more people were trying to find places they could go to be outside, and kind of being away from crowds because it was perceived as being safer because you didn't want to get sick or you wanted to have that space. So often, and this happened in Australia, that there was an increase in some of the incidences along the shore because people were seeking out more remote areas that they weren't familiar with because they couldn't fly to somewhere, so they were driving and looking for places to go and maybe landing on places that they weren't familiar with, and there wasn't anyone to ask. There wasn't a guard there, or there wasn't a protective system that was in place. And I think it's really important that we again come back to that respect and the awareness that just because one beach doesn't mean every beach is the same. There's a lot of hidden conditions and a lot of dynamic conditions that can change things and make a great intended trip something that can be life-changing in not so much a good way.
So speaking of traveling and the importance in your world and certainly in my world and really everyone's world should be, and that is partnerships. You've visited a few of our National Weather Service weather forecast offices. Tell me about what you've learned, what they've learned, and what kind of information are you sharing?
I think that's great. I think that you look at like Surf Life Saving Australia or United States Lifeguard Association or any of a number of organizations that provide a large umbrella of protection, but then it comes down to the local group. So it's not just Surf Life Saving Australia, it's a surf club that's guarding the beach on the Gold Coast, the North Cliff Surf Club and their section of beach that they volunteer and guard. It's not just USLA, it's the Upper Township Beach Patrol guarding the beaches in Strathmere. And I'll tell you that as I've gotten the opportunity to talk to so many of the different weather forecasting offices as we were putting together the Wave Safe series, which took a geographic and demographic specific look at beach safety, because every beach is a little bit different. The Pacific Northwest, the Southeast, the Great Lakes, which are really an inland ocean and behave very much the same way that some of the dynamic ocean conditions that we get here is. So finding all the weather forecasting offices, the WFOs, recognize that they have partners that are, encouraging people to come down and visit our shores, and our economy is based on tourism coming here, just like it is here. And so we want people to come down, we want to visit, we want them to experience this great place. But the great partners to help build those safety factors are, the tourist bureaus and the chambers of commerce and the local businesses on the boardwalk. Our foundation was lucky a couple of years ago that we were able to, at the same time we were releasing the Wave Safe series, we had a local yogurt place on the boardwalk where people were going during their beach visits that was playing the safety videos on recognizing rip currents and recognizing dangerous beach conditions. So as you're standing there waiting for your food, you're getting a little bit of information about, hey, this is what you may find on the beach here. And I think that those of us that are in a position to not just create some of the information that's going to help keep people safe, but spread it and teach it and train others, that finding ways to magnify the reach and the impact of that message is great. And I think what's also important is kind of meeting people where they are in understanding, because too often I've read stories, post-action stories in the paper and stuff, or overheard, discussions, people talking about, oh, well, they went out in the water and, it was tragic. They were caught in a rip current. And often people will say, oh, well, it should be common sense that you don't go out in conditions like that. It should be common sense. And the one challenge with relying just on common sense is common sense requires common experiences. It requires someone to have an experience from which they can draw to go, yeah, this is not a good time to go in. You know, when we tell people, you know, don't dive in to shallow water, don't dive into water in which you don't know the depth. But unless you know what a safe depth is, it can still be dangerous. Let's say you know that the water is 3 feet deep at the end of that jetty, but you don't know that 3 feet deep when you're diving off of a jetty that's 5 feet above the surface of the water is not a safe depth. It's not just about knowing the depth and knowing what's there. It's also having a shared experience or someone who can pass along that shared experience that says, this isn't the right place to go and do this, or this isn't the right thing that you should be doing on this beach. That's better off, you know, somewhere else. And those partners that the WFOs rely on so heavily, you know, the local beach patrol agencies, the local first responders, police, fire, anyone that's helping to kind of pass along information that's kind of that local knowledge that's so important. Any new body of water I go to, or even places where I've been often, like I used to live in Santa Cruz, California, and Monterey Bay was home waters for me. And I go back pretty often. I've got a favorite beach that I like to go and swim in or train in and paddle in. Even though I've spent years going there, I will still go up to the lifeguard stand and go, hey, what's going on in the water right now? You know, I don't know if it's, you know, post-storm and there's runoff or there's bacteria or wildlife, sharks sometimes in Monterey Bay, or shore breaks or something that's forecasted to come in. Those partners, those agencies that get information from the WFOs and are then the front line to pass it along to beachgoers, that's great. And it's not, you know, it's not about ego going, I know I've done this before, nothing's going to happen to me. It's like, no, I know that anything can happen. And I have been caught and had my bell rung many, many times because stuff came up that came up out of the blue. You know, fog rolls in that just popped up. Many people don't have a huge body of experience in how to stay calm and react to those dangerous situations. That's what we train lifeguards to do, so that
Right.
they're the calm ones in those dangerous situations. And I think that these partners that take the information and facts that Weather Service puts out and the Weather Ready Nation makes available and then translates it to, you know, where are they coming from with their understanding of the beach. I mean, I've had people come up to me on the beach and go, hey, is the ocean changing today? And I didn't understand what they meant. And what they were talking about is tides. They just didn't know what the phrase was. They knew that the water, that there was more and less beach, but they didn't understand that was a tide. And that's not saying they weren't smart or anything like that. They had no experience, you know, with the ocean and the beach. And so why would they know that we can have a tidal change that'll change the water 5 feet inside of 6 hours or so?
Right. Now, a
Yeah.
lot of good stuff here, and you mentioned the Pacific Ocean. So, you know, we've got 3-4 questions that we're going to get to, but before we get to the Q&A, because we have some great questions here.
Yeah.
One last topic we want to touch on, and that is sort of the key ingredient in all of this is the human dimension, right? It's the social science. It's, you know, even innovation using technology to reach people, to get them to, you know, either modify their behavior or learn new things, but retain that for a lifetime. What are some of the research, or what's the creativity going on in your world to reach that? And I know, you know, it goes back to this, the Wave Safe program here.
Yeah. And I think that, you know, a few years ago when the National Weather Service, you know, we came together with them to look at the Wave Safe program, recognizing that there are universal things like shore break and rip currents and cold water but how those are experienced at each beach and what the person arriving at that beach may know or not know, is very different. And I think when we really look at from a social science perspective on how we message and how we reach people, we can be more effective. So it's great to have the science down, but then how do we communicate that to this person? And my wife is a social scientist that has works with NOAA and the National Weather Service and providing the social science perspective alongside the oceanographers or the meteorologist perspective on this. And I think that how someone is going to recognize a danger or respond to a danger is going to be very different based on their experience, where they're coming from. Someone who's never been to the ocean before, coming from the middle of the country at the beach for the first time, is going to be literally knocked off their feet when they see how strong a wave can be. And at the same time, lifeguards drill again and again and again to train a response to dangerous situations. And without that training, that panic and fear kind of comes in. And I think we look at where people are coming from geographically and their experience before they arrive, but then also the age of that person. How someone who's 10 years old responds to a danger is going to be different from someone who's 16 or 18 or 40 or 60. And I think that one of the things that we're looking at is not just how many times someone views a video or sees a new informational poster on the beach, but how can we kind of connect with them in some way? And we're looking at some new technology and some of the stuff that we're putting up in some test locations in Texas and the Gulf Coast that use some of the technology that your phone uses to near field communication, this NFC technology, so that you can touch your phone to it, and not only do you have something in front of you that says there's a high rip warning or there's dangerous shore break here, but also can link you to more detailed information that you might be able to look at when you've got more time or focus or attention, but then also may connect you to the safety resources at the same time. Like, this is where Beach Patrol headquarters is, or this is where you need to get, this is where you can find help if something happens. And I think that I'm pretty excited right now that we're able to still put up, in the traditional sense, the informational posters and signs and information that pull from the science, like rip current forecasting, but then provide this electronic way or digital way to interact with someone, to find out, hey, when you came to the beach, what did you arrive knowing? And then now that you're leaving, what do you know now that you're leaving? And then also a way to possibly kind of communicate with people, before their feet are in the sand. I mean, I know that when I'm going down to the beach and, I'm walking up and over the dunes and I've got boards and craft and I'm getting ready to train and I'm just in that mode. Or if I were a parent, I've got kids in tow that can't wait to get to the beach and they're ready to scatter the minute we get over the sand dune. I've got all this stuff. I'm really not primed at that moment to kind of learn what I need to do to be safe. So one of the things that we're looking at socially is, how do we reach people and communicate? How do we teach them how to be safe or weather safe further upstream? How do we reach people? And this is a great vehicle. How do we tell people, go, hey, keep these 3 things in mind: respect the ocean, stay aware at the shore, and then take 10. Our mandate of this is how you protect yourself and others. And hopefully we're going to show that in just a minute, before your feet are in the sand and you're distracted by everything else that's going on right around you. And I think that's what's really exciting, is we're really looking at how have we effectively and positively impacted people's behavior and what they know and don't know.
Excellent. So before we get to the video, I want to do kind of a rapid fire on some of these questions, and and then end with a very well crafted question. They're all great questions, but one in particular jumps out at me because it's something that you and I have discussed, offline. I think we discussed it in our first webinar as well. But we've got about 4 questions here. So one, one person raises the question, and it's, I think, more directed at me here as the meteorologist, pointing out like the false sense of security if someone's using, you know, their weather app, their radar app, maybe they have the lightning capabilities. And the way I would answer this is, you know, we all have risk tolerances, and we all, you know, kind of work off an amount of margin, right? It goes back to that one more minute. Oh, I want one more minute at the beach. And it's in that delay that the lightning strikes, right? If people are taking their, you know, almost playing an amateur meteorologist of, oh, you know, the radar, we still have 5 minutes. What they're doing is, you know, the risk is skyrocketing up as that storm's getting closer. And, you know, they're kind of playing that armchair meteorologist where they're interpreting data that may not even be entirely accurate, because, you know, radar is a way to observe precipitation and whatnot, but it's not a perfect, you know, it's exactly laid on. So if the rain is starting, you know, just to your west, you can't be as precise as I think some people like to do, you know, in their decision making. And also radar data is about, on average, I think 6 minutes old when it finally gets to your cell phone. So the weather keeps moving in that 6 minutes. So the best advice is you got to give yourself that cushion. Got to be that extra margin of, hey, we see the danger, take action now. You don't need the extra 5 or 10 minutes. Make sure you're safe. So there's an answer to that.
Yeah.
And then Diane has some nice words for you. Yep, go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, I see a couple of the questions, and I figured I'll jump right into. They were talking about some of the surf stuff. Scott was talking about the Pacific and rogue waves and distant storms, and a really good point. And Scott, I'd encourage you to look at the Wave Safe series and look at the Pacific Northwest one specifically, because we did recognize that from the WFOs that log rolls, which is waves coming up and moving around really large debris on the beach, can pin, trap someone, or push them into the ocean. So he mentions rogue waves or sneaker waves, which is often what they're calling them when they come up on the beach, pulling people into water. And it's a hazard that mostly people encounter in the Pacific Northwest. Log rolls, which is large roll logs that get lifted by a few inches of water and then can take out someone who's on the beach further down. And sneaker waves, where waves can travel 100 meters further up the beach than something has in the previous 20 or 30 minutes or hour, and catch someone completely unaware with no place to escape, because they're surrounded by these, you know, cliffs or more limited access than you would find on the Gulf Coast. So I think that distant storms, rogue waves, and everything, this interaction, they're rogue waves and sneaker waves because they are kind of unpredictable, but they are something that happens specifically in the Pacific Northwest. And Charles asked about timing and wave period, which gets a little bit more into stuff that surfers and surf lifesaving and ocean athletes would know. But people do need to know that waves often do come in sets. And we tell people in our video series, watch the water for 15 minutes or so, which seems like a long time. But I'll tell you, as I'm walking onto the beach, I'm scanning and watching for the wave behavior, knowing that there could be several minutes between larger waves. And just because I walk up and it's pancake flat, there could be something that all of a sudden is chest or head high moments later. And as someone who used to sit at the break at 38th Street in Santa Cruz going, am I going to have to paddle in, or is there another wave coming? There can be significant periods of time between larger waves coming in, which, you know, if you're a surfer, you know to wait. But if you're a beachgoer or someone new to that, know that your experience right there where the waves are breaking can be very different in just a few minutes. And that's where that situational awareness comes in. And knowing that waves do come in sets, and there are long and short periods between the waves themselves and the sets. Someone else asked about tides and how it can be different swimming one of the most dramatic things with tides, if you're in somewhere where there's a flow of water, is the current that the tide might create near an inlet. But also, if you're a swimmer and there's submerged stuff, our water change during tides here can be 4.5 to 5 feet. Because there are jetties that are completely submerged, that if you swim out, you may swim right over top of them at high tide and never know they're there. You start to come back, or you're swimming back along there at low tide, all of a sudden now you're up against a rock getting caught, or maybe a wave's breaking over it. So the tide changing may change where the waves are breaking, how they're breaking, and something that was submerged under 3 feet of water may only now be under a few inches of water and becomes much more dangerous to you. So I think that's one of the key things with tides and how it impacts what you're doing out there in the water. And thanks for the questions, Charles and Rich. Yeah.
So Bruckner, there's no like, you know, where the experts prefer you to swim when the tide's going out versus coming in. There's no evidence that one is safer than the other, right?
Well, it's a great question. I'll answer with an experience. So the beach where I train the lifeguards and guard, we are at the northernmost end of a barrier island. So we're right at an inlet. And that northernmost beach is probably the most dangerous one. And we really, any of the guards that are stationed there know they need to be on high alert. So when the tide is going out, that means there's a massive flow of water from the bay out into the ocean, which causes all kinds of kind of currents and pockets of dangerous conditions right there at that section of beach. So swimmers can be fine, but then all of a sudden be being pulled straight out into the ocean. And that outgoing tide from the bay can run far stronger than even a rip current, like many, very, very fast. And as a lifeguard, you cannot virtually swim against it at all. It's like rip currents on steroids. But then also on an incoming tide, we know the water's flooding back in there, which means it might pull someone who's a little bit past the break and start to pull them into the inlet. And often with those changing heights of water and the tides changing up near there, where the waves are breaking and the sandbars and how that hits becomes very different. So we know that that beach can be dangerous, and we often will set areas where people can safely swim, usually within a 30 or 40 yard area in front of the stands. And we will or can move the stand or move where we have people positioned to swim based on what's going on right there, right then. We may have, rip currents aren't always predictable, but we know that at this beach, at this tide, there's a gully and a rip current will usually form. And so we know that when we come back from lunch, we need to move our swimmers over so that they're not in that rip current. And as lifeguards, situational awareness is the main thing. We're always looking at where do we need to move where our swimmers are, because there may be something that's more dangerous at low tide than there is at high, or vice versa.
So it's when we tell people swim where there's a lifeguard, it's not only do you have someone scanning the water there to enter the water if you're in distress, but also they're looking at what is that safe, what's the safest part of the beach. And sometimes, the rough surf is everywhere. They can't necessarily one over another. So great. And I want to make sure we show the video, but to get to Diane's point, and you can jump in if I'm off base here, but I think the greatest risk that you're mentioning in there are jellyfish. I mean, they're kind of everywhere, and people get stung, and Bruckner, I remember you telling me how you pretty much got it head to toe when you're doing an endurance swim.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time being stung by jellyfish. I think that, and Diane, hi Diane, thanks for joining us. I think that a lot of people, there are areas where the wildlife can be really dangerous. We talk about sharks or jellyfish and any of a number of other things that can kind of make an uncomfortable, make a beach trip either uncomfortable or very dangerous. And I think that, the jellyfish, one of the things we look at is are you susceptible to it? Some people can get stung by a bee and it's annoying. Other people get stung by a bee and you need to get an EpiPen so they can keep breathing. And I think that really recognizing what is that area known for as far as wildlife, what do you need to be aware of? When Portuguese man-o-war are in season in certain beaches, that's a time to be really aware of where you're going into the water. That's something in Australia, Hawaii, where you'll see stinger alerts or stinging notifications. On the East Coast, at least for the last few years, we haven't had a lot of large jellyfish blooms, but they will be out there. And actually, when there's not a big bloom and they're just some random jellies and you're not expecting them, often, someone's not allergic to it, it's something you're not expecting, it's painful, and that panic can then precipitate other responses that all of a sudden it becomes dangerous to them or to someone else. And someone who's never been stung before, even just being bumped by something in the water you're not expecting, I've seen people panic and really get themselves into trouble because the fear kind of takes over and they're like, I need to get out of here right now. And they don't make really good decisions. And that's often where we as lifeguards, have to kind of intervene.
So we're wrapping up here. We do want to show the video real quick. So there was a good, I really appreciated the comment from Charles that at least, beachgoers are trying to determine the localized weather when we were talking about the radar apps and whatnot. And I do want to clarify that, whether it's a weather app, your radar, whatever, information you're receiving is a good thing, and it helps you make better decisions for sure. I guess my point is sometimes we take it to a razor thin margin where we're expecting everything to be exactly as they're presented. And sometimes you got to give that pillow, that wiggle room where you're not just trying to get exactly to shelter right when you're in danger. You got to give that buffer. The professionals do it. They make sure that they have some wiggle room there. It's always good to see, but yes, too many people are just completely ignoring the weather. They think they're in paradise and nothing's going to stop them. Last comment or last question. Well, I'm going to take, there are two more questions. I'm going to kind of combine them. One, Bruckner, is there sort of a universal distress signal? Is it just to wave? Because some people think, oh, they're just saying hi. What do you do if you're caught in a rip current, you're under distress? How do you get people's attention? And then connected to that, and maybe this is a good bridge into the video, we see too often it's the rescuer, the dad or the family member or someone who's first into the water when they see someone in distress, and they're the ones ending up being the drowning victim.
Yeah, and I think Take 10 exists because we recognize that there is second victim drowning. And another phrase that we'll use sometimes is drowning for love. And we know that if someone's in trouble that you love or that you're close to, you're going to go in the water. And all we're saying is take a pause. That's what Take 10 is. In Samoan, it was fatali, wait. The same thing a lifeguard would do. We're not going to charge into the water until we radio for help. We put up a flag, we grab a rescue can, and then we go in. And someone asked how to signal. One thing I always have with me is a whistle. All the lifeguards on the beaches in Jersey and most lifeguards will have whistles because it cuts through a lot of noise and signals. Even when I'm out training, I'll have a whistle with me in case I need to signal to someone else that I'm in trouble, or signal to someone else that something's going on to be aware of. And the traditional waving to get someone's attention, but also recognizing that's hard to see when there's breaking surf. And often, as someone who actually was rescued from drowning when he was young, I went straight to the bottom. And this is where drowning doesn't look like what most people expect. Many people who really are in the drowning process, they won't be able to do this. They're frantically just trying to stay above water. So signaling is someone before they're in the process of drowning, but signaling and getting attention. But the one thing we tell people is stay calm, relax, because often panic precipitates bad decisions. and doesn't give someone time to get to you. And I think that, you know, I swear by a whistle. I have them with me all the time. We encourage other people that if they're going swimming or training with other people, have whistles so you can signal to lifeguards. We actually ended up rescuing someone while we were filming the Wave Safe series in Hawaii. I had a whistle with me. I was able to signal to the lifeguard on duty at Waikiki, and we both came together to help the tourist that was at Waikiki that was in trouble. But I think let's dive into the video and maybe come out of that and take some questions on the specifics. But if you do nothing else, these actions are based on what lifeguards would do and how we would think protecting ourselves so that we're in a good position to save someone else.
And all this content, where can they find it?
Great, because I think we may have had a glitch with the sound. We had subtitles. On NOAA Ocean Today, Wave Safe will land you at the resting part for all the videos for all the different parts of the country. I know that they're also working on some stuff for the Gulf Coast and Great Lakes, but you can find that Wave Safe piece. These are all available for download and to be shared at your school or at your business or anywhere else where you may be interacting with people heading to the shore. But NOAA Ocean Today Wave Safe series will land you on that. If you go to NOAA Ocean Today, you can also click on the danger zone and also find the whole library of pieces about rip currents as well.
Well, thank you, Bruckner, so much. Again, I predicted it was going to be the fastest hour in a long time.
It always is. Yeah.
But we appreciate your expertise and your knowledge and your experience. And thank you, everybody, for joining. And whether you're joining us here live or on the recording at some other time, again, take some time, take 10 seconds right now. Start thinking about what you can do, take 10. And then, it's a continuum from when you plan that trip all the way through to you're walking out on the beach. Talk to the lifeguard, be involved, ensure that day at the beach is the best one ever. So,
and keep coming back. Philosophy, respect the ocean. Mindset, stay aware. And action, take 10. Protect yourself to save others. We want you to live to be the hero.
That's right. Thank you, everybody.
Thanks, everyone. Reach out. Look forward to hearing from everyone and seeing you on the beach.